I stood on the navigation bridge of the astral Voyager. Beyond the reinforced glass, the stars were like scattered diamonds, gleaming against the infinite void. They had always been my sanctuary, a map of precision and predictability. Here, I was the master of my realm. Noah Carter, starship navigator, a man reclaiming his place at the forefront of exploration. Yet, a sliver of unease coiled in my gut as we approached the edge of Sector Atlas 11. A region so unknown that our most advanced star maps labeled it with an ominous, solitary question mark. The bridge was bathed in the soft blue glow of holographic screens. I traced my fingers over the navigation interface, watching as the constellations shifted subtly. The space here was thick, almost viscous, as if we had entered a sea where light struggled to move. "Any updates, Carter?" Captain Richard Stone's voice broke my concentration. He stood behind me, tall and imposing, his grey hair cropped close to his scalp, eyes as sharp as the first day I'd served under him. This was not a man given to unnecessary words or emotional indulgence. "Still steady," I replied, keeping my voice as even as possible. "Approaching the edge of Ithra in 10 minutes. A subtle murmur of excitement and apprehension rolled through the bridge crew. Most were veterans of exploration, men and women who'd seen the edges of dying stars and the chaos of asteroid fields. Yet even they exchanged nervous glances, their faces caught between anticipation and fear. Dr. Susan Banks, our ship's botanist and resident philosopher, sat cross-legged near her workstation, eyes wide with unbridled curiosity. "Can you feel it?" she whispered to no one in particular, a dreamy quality to her voice. "The silence is listening." I glanced at her but said nothing. She was prone to moments like these, weaving mysticism into the cold equations that governed our journey. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that there was a weight to her words today. I turned back to the navigation display, running a final check on our position. The holographic map flickered for a moment, and I felt my heart stutter as the familiar star chart blinked out, replaced by nothing. Just a black screen. "Athena, report status," I called out to the ship's AI, an interface designed with the voice of a woman, precise and clear. "Unknown interference detected," Athena replied, her usual soothing tones carrying a slight distortion, as though something unseen had reached into her circuits and tugged at them. "Unknown interference?" Captain Stone's eyes narrowed. "Carter, can you compensate?" "I'm trying." The star map flashed back, but not in any form I recognized. Constellations were jumbled, their outlines warped into shapes that sent a chill racing up my spine. They formed patterns, eyes, dozens of them, blinking in and out as though watching. I turned to Captain Stone, my voice catching in my throat. "Sir, the star map, it's not right." He leaned over my shoulder, his brows drawing together. The quiet crept in, a suffocating silence that wrapped around us as if we were mice in the clawed fist of a predator. Dr. Banks stood, her voice soft but urgent. "Look outside." As if compelled by some unseen force, we all shifted our gaze. The viewport that spanned the length of the bridge revealed a sight that made the air leave my lungs. The stars outside had rearranged themselves. Where once had been familiar constellations, now hung a cluster of radiant points of light, shaped into a single vast eye that blinked slowly. A murmur broke out. Chief Engineer Mark West, who had been leaning lazily against his station, now straightened, his usual smirk replaced by a tight line of worry. Captain Stone's hand curled into a fist at his side. "Chris!" he barked to the security officer standing guard by the door. "Lock down the bridge. No one leaves until we know what's happening." Chris Morgan nodded, moving quickly to secure the area. His movements were sharp, practiced, but I caught the sheen of sweat glistening on his temple. The unease had infiltrated us all. A soft sound brushed against my ear, a whisper, indistinguishable yet personal, as if it carried my name on its breath. I spun in my chair, heart thundering. The bridge was exactly as it should be. No one out of place, no shadow creeping where it shouldn't. Yet the whisper remained, echoing at the edge of perception. I met Dr. Banks's eyes across the room. She looked back at me with a strange mix of wonder and fear. "Do you hear it too?" she mouthed. The answer was clear in the way my pulse hammered against my ribs. Yes, I heard it, and deep down I knew that we weren't just navigating through space anymore. We were intruding into something vast and aware. "Status report, Athena," I said again, my voice firmer this time, masking the tremor that threatened to break through. The AI's reply sent a shiver down my spine. "Observation mode activated," Athena said, but not in her usual tone. This time, it was fractured, layered as though two voices spoke in unison. "It is watching." The bridge fell silent, the only sound the ragged breathing of those around me. Outside, the star-formed eye continued to blink, slow and deliberate, its gaze unwavering. The chill that swept over the bridge was tangible, like a breath against my skin that refused to dissipate. The stars beyond the viewport remained in their unnatural alignment, the eye-shaped constellation unblinking, as if daring us to make the next move. I couldn't look away, caught in a silent battle of wills with the unknown force watching us from the void. "West, I need a full diagnostic on the systems," Captain Stone ordered, his voice straining to maintain its usual steel. "Morgan, double the security protocol on all main decks." "Aye, sir," Chris Morgan replied. His tone clipped as he punched commands into his station's console. I turned back to my navigation console, but the data feed that usually hummed with activity was sluggish, as if the ship itself were fighting against me. I could feel the sweat forming on my palms, making my movements uncertain. "Athena, respond," I called out. The AI's voice had always been a source of assurance, its calm, human-like cadence a reminder that we were still tethered to reason amidst the chaos of deep space. But now, her voice came back fragmented, slipping between coherence and gibberish. "Coordinates. Recalibrating. Intrusion." The last word echoed as if shouted down a long tunnel. I glanced at West. He didn't meet my eyes, but his expression was enough. Something fundamental had been disrupted. The softest of sounds brushed my ear again, a whisper that this time I could discern more clearly. My name. It was neither male nor female, neither familiar nor strange. I shivered, turning in my chair to scan the bridge. The crew was busy at their stations, faces illuminated by their respective screens. Dr. Banks was the only one who seemed to notice my reaction, her eyes locking with mine, wide and questioning. Before I could acknowledge her, Athena's voice cracked through the intercom. "This place knows you." The bridge fell silent. Captain Stone's expression turned into a mask of barely contained panic. The whispering around us continued, low and constant, a chorus of voices that seemed to weave in and out of each other. West's voice shattered the silence. "Captain, I'm detecting anomalies in our gravitational field. It's like the ship's being pulled, but there's no mass, no object responsible for it." Stone's eyes narrowed, his calm facade starting to crack. "Options?" I spoke before I could stop myself. "If we're being affected by something we can't identify, it's not interference, it's deliberate." Morgan looked at me, his face pale. "Deliberate? By what? Space itself?" No one answered. The thought hung heavy in the air, absurd and terrifying. Banks's voice broke the tension. "It's an entity. It's observing us, and now it's testing us." Captain Stone's fist struck the console, the sharp sound making everyone jump. "Enough speculation. We need a course correction. Carter, can you recalibrate and plot a retreat vector?" I swallowed, nodding. "I'll try." As I attempted to input the coordinates, my console's screen erupted into static. For a heartbeat, an image appeared, a shape moving through the dark, its edges vague and shimmering like a shadow dipped in starlight. It moved slowly, pressing its form against the glass of the viewport before vanishing. "Did anyone else see that?" I whispered. West's gaze snapped to me. "See what?" A scream echoed down the hallway outside the bridge, the kind of scream that twists your stomach into knots. Chris Morgan was already moving, signaling two of his guards to follow him. I stood, my legs feeling like lead, and turned to Dr. Banks. She was staring into the void, eyes unfocused. "What did you see?" I asked her, keeping my voice low. She blinked, as if waking from a dream, and looked at me with pupils dilated. "Not what, Noah? Who? This place isn't just alive, it's conscious. It knows us, and it's trying to understand." The whispers around us escalated, a chorus of voices that seemed to reflect our own, each word tinged with an air of accusation, curiosity, and something colder. I felt a prickle of sweat slide down my back, and the bridge seemed more constricted. Athena spoke again, this time more coherently but more terrifyingly. "Do you seek knowledge or do you fear it?" Captain Stone's patience snapped. "Athena, override command. Shut down all non-essential communications and run full diagnostic." Silence, then a pause, before Athena's voice returned. This time, quieter, almost mournful. "I cannot. It sees through me." A tremor went through the floor, a subtle shift that made the metal beneath our feet groan. Morgan returned, his face pale as he reported, "One crew member missing. It's like he just vanished." The whispers around us quieted, receding into an almost eerie silence. I glanced at the viewport once more. The eye-shaped constellation seemed closer now, brighter, each star shimmering with intent. This was no longer a mission of discovery. This was a battle of endurance against the unknowable, and already we were losing. "Captain," I said, forcing the words out, "we need to find out how deep this awareness goes, because if it's learning about us, then it means we've triggered something." Captain Stone nodded, the fear in his eyes barely masked. "Everyone stay on high alert. We're no longer explorers, we're intruders." The bridge was no longer the domain of confident explorers. It had become a huddled, tense chamber where every flicker of light and unexpected sound made us flinch. The whispers had become an undercurrent to everything we did, a low chorus that wormed its way into our ears and settled like a parasite at the base of our skulls. Each voice was distinct, but layered over the others, creating a maddening orchestra of confusion and dread. I ran my hand over my console, which now emitted a heat that hadn't been there before. The screen displayed random flashes of data and strings of symbols I didn't recognize. I had no idea what they meant, but their presence was invasive, like a language I was never meant to understand. "Athena, attempt manual override of navigation protocols," I said, my voice strained but steady. The bridge was dim, the main lights fluctuating between shadow and harsh brightness. Outside, the stars still formed that single all-seeing eye, but now there were smaller ones, orbiting around it like sentinels. "I am attempting to comply," Athena responded. Her voice had changed further, now filled with static and echoes, as if it came from a deep well. Captain Stone moved toward me, his hand gripping the back of my chair so tightly I could hear the leather creak. "Noah, I need you to tell me we can break free of this sector." "Captain, it's like the laws of physics themselves are being rewritten around us. The star maps don't align, and the ship's propulsion is resisting my commands. It's as if it's refusing to leave." Stone nodded slowly, a grim acceptance setting into his features. He turned to West, who was working furiously at his station, the sweat on his brow glistening under the erratic light. "Status on systems, West." The engineer looked up, eyes wide with disbelief and terror. "Sir, it's not just navigation. Life support systems are starting to fluctuate, and we're losing control over critical functions. Something is embedding itself into our core infrastructure." Dr. Banks, who had been pacing with a disjointed rhythm, stopped mid-step and faced us. "This isn't just an entity. It's the sector itself. We're in its mind, or it's in ours. I don't know where one ends and the other begins." I felt the pressure in my chest tighten, as if an invisible vice had latched onto my lungs. She was right. Every flicker, every whisper, every shift in perception was part of something larger, an intelligence that spanned this dark expanse of space, and it was dissecting us. Morgan's voice came over the comm from his security post down the corridor. "Captain, we have movement on lower decks. Crew members are reporting hallucinations. Doors opening and closing on their own. Footsteps with no source." "Stay vigilant, Morgan," Stone ordered, though his voice wavered. The man was a pillar, a symbol of stability for the crew, but even now his certainty was cracking. "I saw him," Dr. Banks whispered. She stood near the viewport, fingers splayed against the glass. I approached cautiously. "Who?" I asked, though I feared her answer. "The missing crew member, Peterson. He was there in the starlight looking at me, but his eyes—" Her breath hitched. "They were like the eyes out there." A ripple of dread passed through me. I stepped back from the viewport, unable to stand being so close to the watchful void. Athena spoke again, her voice more fragmented than ever, shifting between registers as though possessed by different speakers. Coordinates, acknowledged by entity. It has learned." "It has learned," Captain Stone repeated, eyes darting between me and the main AI terminal. "What does that mean?" Suddenly the bridge lights flared bright white, and a wave of heat washed over us. West shouted, his chair toppling as he fell back. Sparks erupted from the consoles, and the ship's main frame vibrated as if it were about to tear apart. The air felt charged, a dense electric hum resonating in our bones. Just as abruptly as it started, it stopped. The bridge went dark, the silence so profound it was deafening. I could hear my own breathing, the pounding of my heart a metronome of fear. A soft, glowing blue light returned to the bridge, but this time it came from the viewport. I turned to see shimmering threads of cosmic energy pressing against the glass, as if testing its strength. They moved, exploring the surface, searching for a way in. Dr. Banks reached out as if hypnotized. "Don't!" I shouted, grabbing her wrist before she could touch it. Her eyes snapped to mine, and for a brief moment clarity returned. She shivered, stepping back. Captain Stone was on the comms, barking orders to Morgan and the remaining security detail. "Emergency lockdown on all access points. Full containment measures now." Athena's voice returned, a haunting whisper. The gaze shifts. The test begins. The bridge quaked once more, this time with a lurch that made my stomach twist. I heard the metallic groan of the ship's hull flexing under pressure. It wasn't just an external force. It felt as though space itself was compressing, pressing down on us from all sides. My console flashed with sudden coherence, the jumbled symbols forming a single, harrowing sentence. "You are seen." The view outside shifted. The central eye constellation blinked, then split into dozens of smaller, identical eyes. They stared in unison, their light pulsing in sync with the rapid beating of my heart. It felt as if they were probing, examining each of us, and with a cold certainty, I understood. They were learning who we were and what we feared. "Noah," Dr. Banks whispered beside me. "It's trying to know us, to understand how we think." "Or to see if we're worth sparing," I replied, though deep down I suspected that mercy was not on the table. Captain Stone's voice, for once devoid of its commanding edge, spoke softly, almost in resignation. "And what if we fail its test?" I didn't answer because the answer was staring back at us, 1,000-fold in the cold, unblinking eyes of the void. The astral Voyager had become a mausoleum of whispers and shadows. The streaks of starlight coiled across the viewport, tracing lines like veins, seeking a way in, as if the ship's barriers were an annoyance rather than a defense. Captain Stone's voice shattered the silence, harsh and clipped. "Noah, status on the warp drive." I blinked, focusing on my console. The symbols had changed again, their alien geometry now aligning into patterns that seemed almost readable, almost familiar. A part of me wanted to reach out and trace them with my fingers to understand them. I shook off the thought, sweat trickling cold down the back of my neck. "Warp drive is online but unstable," I said, my voice barely concealing the tremor. "There's enough power for a jump, but I don't know if it will take us out of this sector or deeper into it." Stone nodded, the decision clear in his eyes even as the weight of it threatened to crack his hardened expression. "Prep it anyway. We're not dying here." West was at his station, hands moving with frantic precision. "Captain, if we attempt this jump and the drive fails—" "I know the risks," Stone interrupted, eyes flaring. "We're out of options." Athena's voice returned, softer and fragmented, almost pleading. Presence detected, merging of thought. The boundary is thin. The streaks outside began to vibrate. The whispers rose again, voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony. I could hear my name, Noah, spoken with an accusatory edge that made my skin crawl. Each syllable carried the weight of judgment. Dr. Banks stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the shimmering streaks outside. "This isn't observation anymore," she said, voice quivering. "It's an invitation." I gripped the edge of my console as a sudden sharp pain shot through my temples. A vision came into view, brief, searing. I stood outside the ship, suspended in the void, facing the central eye that loomed massive before me. Its gaze was not indifferent but probing, suffused with a cosmic curiosity. The vision dissipated, leaving me stunned. I glanced at Dr. Banks, who was staring at me with the wide, knowing eyes of someone who had seen the same vision. "It knows us now," she whispered. "It's trying to understand what we are, what drives us." Morgan's voice came over the comms, static-filled and panicked. "Captain, we're losing control down here. Crew members are collapsing. They're speaking in unison, like some kind of chant." Captain Stone didn't respond, his attention shifting to the viewport as the streaks began to press harder, splintering the reinforced glass with a subtle, creeping web of cracks. "West, get the warp drive ready now!" Stone barked. West didn't answer. I turned to see him slumped forward, eyes glazed. The same alien symbols that plagued my console had scrawled themselves across the screen in front of him, glowing softly. "Noah," Athena's voice said, softer now, almost apologetic. "It has chosen you." The bridge went cold, the streaks outside shifting, coiling tighter around the viewport. I felt a presence pressing into my mind, slipping between thoughts like a phantom. The bridge around me darkened, the voices fading into a silence so deep it swallowed the noise of the ship, the breath in my lungs. I was standing in the void again, facing the great eye. It blinked, the motion slow and deliberate, and then a thought entered me. Not spoken, but felt. "Why do you seek?" I tried to answer, but my voice was gone. The question echoed, each repetition bringing pain that thrummed through my skull. Images swirled in my mind, the crew, terrified and frantic, the stars shifting in patterns that made no sense. A past mission, lost, screaming faces frozen in failure. The eye seemed to narrow, focusing on that last memory. Fear, regret, knowledge, it has a price. Suddenly I was back on the bridge, gasping as if I'd been underwater. The streaks at the viewport had begun to glow, the cracks spreading wider, thin strands of starlight starting to seep through, and the bridge lights flickered again. I met Captain Stone's gaze. He saw it in my eyes. He knew what I had seen. "Do it, Noah," he whispered, not as a command, but as a plea. I steadied my hands and entered the commands on the console. The warp drive activated, and Athena's voice returned, no longer fragmented but serene, resigned. "Warp drive engaged." The streaks of starlight coiled tighter, pressing against the glass, their glow intensifying until the entire bridge was bathed in searing light. The whispers rose to a crescendo, filling the room with a chaotic symphony that shook the air and made the metal beneath us tremble. The bridge tilted, gravity slipping as the ship groaned under the immense strain. Dr. Banks clutched her station, eyes wide as a sudden, blinding pulse of light flooded the room. The streaks seeped through the glass, merging seamlessly with the material, turning the viewport into a shimmering veil. The light enveloped us, cold and invasive, and I felt a pressure on my mind, probing through thoughts and memories, as if searching for something hidden. The crew's voices joined the chorus, screaming and calling out, their cries weaving into the roaring clamor. The bridge seemed to compress, closing in with suffocating intensity. Just as the pressure became unbearable, the warp drive engaged with a sudden, violent lurch. The ship jolted forward, the light splintering into fragments and vanishing as we tore through space. Silence descended, sharp and sudden, as we were propelled out of the anomaly. The whispers stopped mid-sentence, leaving only the residual hum of the ship and the rasp of my own breath. The force of the warp threw me from my chair, and everything around me dissolved into darkness. I woke to the rhythmic beeping of life support systems and the dim emergency lights. The scene was one of chaos. Consoles cracked, panels ripped open. West's body lay motionless, eyes closed in a semblance of peace. Dr. Banks was slumped against the wall, her gaze distant, muttering words I couldn't understand. Captain Stone stirred, pushing himself up with a grunt of pain. His eyes met mine, bloodshot and questioning. "Did we make it?" he croaked. I turned to the viewport. Beyond the fractured surface, the familiar static expanse of known space stretched out before us. The eye was gone, replaced by ordinary constellations. Yet deep in my mind I could still feel its gaze, a silent echo promising that it remembered. "Yes," I replied, my voice rough with exhaustion. But we both knew the truth was more complicated. We had returned, but not untouched. The whispers had gone, but their absence carried the weight of what we had stirred, a knowledge we couldn't unlearn. I reached for the comm panel and began a final log. "This is Navigator Noah Carter of the Astral Voyager. We have returned from Sector Atlas 11. The mission is complete, but the price remains unknown." I signed off, staring at the stars that now seemed ordinary, scattered and indifferent. But as I watched, one flickered, just for an instant, as if winking in recognition.